These mixed signals might have a certain impact in the president's view, but it's certainly keeping the market confused. Are we closer or further away from a deal?
You know, frankly, I think it reflects the sort of competing tensions that the administration is trying to juggle at the moment.
Yeah.
I think you've heard the president over a couple of days now say, you know, looking for a quick solution. The possibility of robust military escalation is on the table, but also preserving the diplomatic off-ramp. And I think those competing tensions reflect the larger cacophony of noise, as you were saying, the domestic concerns, the congressional concerns, the allied concerns. There's a lot going on here. And I think the duality reflects that we don't really know yet how this is going to conclude or where it's even going to go next. And so that is reflected in this tension.
Yeah. Well, we know the conclusion President Trump wants. He says he wants to guarantee that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. Can you reach that conclusion via kinetic military action, or can you only actually get to that point with diplomacy and a negotiated deal?
Kaylee, you've gone like right to the heart of the issue here. It is incredibly difficult to use military force to destroy permanently a country's ability to acquire nuclear weapons. What we have seen historically is where military force has been successful, and I'll use that loosely, it has been more productive, at least in instances where countries have small, new, centralized military programs, and military and nuclear programs specifically. And that is the opposite of what we have with Iran. Iran has been working on a nuclear endeavor for decades. They have learned from other countries who've been on the receiving end of military force, say Syria or what have you, and they are smart. They have hardened their facilities. They have dispersed their facilities. They have built in redundancies. So military force can get you to degrade the capacity, it can delay it, it can impose costs, but fundamentally it's about a political decision.
Yeah.
You need the regime to decide that this is not something that they see in their interest, and we've been waiting for that for a very long time.
Well, we sure have, and it seemed to be, I guess we could call it a miscalculation by the administration on the political leadership, potential future political leadership of Iran. The president has already suggested or declared that regime change has taken place, but imagine a world in which there was a U.S. strike that broke Mahmoud Ahmadinejad out of his house arrest and put him at the top of the regime. The New York Times has a big scoop to say this was plan A for the administration. Apparently he was too badly injured to make this happen. What would have taken place in that world?
You know, it's each next iteration of this story, there's something more wild than what we've been thinking about.
Does it imply a misunderstanding of the politics domestically in Iran?
I think it implies a misunderstanding of what military force was going to be able to do quickly in Iran. And whether it's Ahmadinejad in particular or someone else, my sense is the hope was both in the United States and potentially in Israel as well, that military force would quickly lead to an uprising, whether a Kurdish intervention, some kind of more moderate regime coming to power in Iran, and both in terms of the successor to the Ayatollah, who appears to be more radical rather than less, and you know, the possibility of Ahmadinejad coming to office, which seems to have not gotten anywhere real fast, suggests that they had high hopes for something that was going to be a much more a quick success, and that has not been borne out.
Of course, that was also the hope of Operation Midnight Hammer, and the president to this day still maintains that it was the quick success that the U.S. was looking for, that it led to the obliteration of Iran's nuclear program, but we are still here talking about said nuclear program, and he keeps coming back to this issue of the nuclear dust, the enriched uranium still in Iranian possession. He has, in just the last few days, referred to it as psychologically important for the United States to retrieve. He, in an interview last week, suggested that it was important to get that remaining enriched uranium for essentially public relations purposes. Can you talk to us about the consequence of being able to obtain that, guarantee Iran no longer has it, what they could do with it, even if it is dust, quote unquote?
Right. So my read is that it's more than dust, right? What we are talking about is significant quantities of enriched uranium. And before last summer's military campaign and this military campaign this year, you know, the best estimates from the International Atomic Energy Agency were that it was enough material to make multiple nuclear weapons following a political decision to do so, which they have not made. And so that material is consequential. We'll get to the politics and the rhetoric and the psychology terminology of it, but it is consequential in terms of a future decision to pursue nuclear weaponization. And one of the consequences of this military campaign and last summer's is that the IAEA inspectors have been kicked out, and we have far less insight into what is going on the ground, what is happening on the ground with the nuclear materials, this and otherwise. And so I am deeply concerned about where that material ends up, and I'm also very concerned about what the military operation would look like to go in and get it. This is not a trivial undertaking, and we've seen that this has been a robust campaign where the Iranians have been able to hit back and persist and persevere over weeks and months, and so we're not dealing with an easy mission by any means. So I think the president is correct that this is important, but I think it misses the larger picture to just think about it as a psychological thing.
Well, he was trying to make the rationale to suggest that we're watching it 24 hours a day. We've got satellite coverage. They can't get near this without us bombing them, knowing that it would take thousands of troops to excavate that material in a very delicate mission to get it out of the country or safely disposed of somewhere. When you consider the cornered animal that this regime could be if the United States resumes strikes, would they be able to get to that material or not?
You know, it's hard to know because we don't know what that resumption of military activity would look like on the part of the United States. I can say that we have been burned before as an international community that thought it had great insight, great satellite coverage, great intelligence, and there are things that we were surprised by, you know, in the Iranian case and otherwise. And so that makes me skeptical that we have anything close to perfect intelligence or insight into what is going on. And it's hard to think about pursuing this kind of an operation without hostility. And it's even more complicated during an active war zone and with everything else that would be going on. So I don't think we should minimize or trivialize what it would take.
Well, so I want to get back to the idea of monitoring that Joe was talking about, that the U.S. military via satellites is able to keep an eye on what Iran is doing. If we eventually, and it is an if, get to some kind of negotiated agreement with Iran where they have said that they will stand by a moratorium of X period of years on enrichment, how can that be guaranteed if you don't have the IAEA in there with inspectors actually being able to directly monitor up close and personal that activity?
I think the short answer is you can't. I think, to my mind, what I would hope is that any agreement, any negotiated solution that comes out of this experience involves the IAEA and deep and intrusive inspections. Not for nothing, the previous Iran deal that the Obama administration had negotiated had included what I think the nuclear community had perceived to be the most intrusive inspections regime the world had ever seen. I hope we can get somewhere close back to that in order to be able to have the on-the-ground monitoring that I think is nothing short of necessary.
What would be the psychological impact of the next big hit, as the president says? He's threatened power plants, desalination plants, infrastructure that civilians share with the military. If he actually followed through with that, knocked the lights out, and killed a bunch of people, does it bring us closer to a deal, or does it get the regime into more of a war footing?
You know, it's a really hard question, and I think one thing we can say so far is that the regime and the population have demonstrated themselves to be terribly resolved, right? They are not going quietly. They have not folded, right? We haven't seen...
And the people have not risen up?
The people have not risen up, despite any kind of projections about what that would look like from the U.S. Or the Israelis. So I'm personally skeptical that that is what we would see. I think we can point to the fact that there may be one major paradox to using military force as a counter-proliferation strategy, right? If you are using military tools to try to convince someone they don't need nuclear weapons to protect themselves, you may actually paradoxically, counterintuitively, convince them that that's the very thing that they need. So I worry about the implications of that, you know, going hard, hitting the population, the electrical grid, et cetera, that it might just further harden an already hardened regime towards this goal that we're ostensibly trying to prevent in the first place.
Well, we're so glad you could join us, Professor. I hope we don't have to come to Atlanta to get you back on.